think, okay, we are good. All right. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us this morning. Mr. Verlich and I have a very exciting presentation for you planned about the SAT and the ACT. And before we get started, I just want to go ahead and have all the counselors introduce themselves so everyone can kind of put a name with our faces. So Ms. Sinclair, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Miss Sinclair, and I work with students with last names A through E because we're all about excellence.
Miss Harris, you're muted.
I'm Miss Harris, and I have students F through J, which is a funny joke.
And I'm Miss Ponti. I have students' last names K through Q because we're the best. We're the kings and queens at Calvert High.
And I'm Mr. Verlich, and I have students' last names R through Z. And I'm from Pittsburgh, so I like to say the Ravens score 0, and that's been pretty true this year, so it's been a better year.
So now everybody could put our faces with our names, even if you can't see us in person, at least you can see that. So like I said, Mr. Verlich and I have a very exciting presentation planned for you about the SAT and the ACT. We always joke that we kind of draw the short end of the stick because this is probably the most exciting one, most, junior breakfast, that's the least exciting, but we'll give you some good information today. Mr. Verlich, are you ready? I'll go ahead and change the slide. All right, perfect. Let me make sure this works. All right.
And I guess just the first thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, as far as what are the SAT and ACT, and you've probably heard of them, but they're standardized tests that the college look at, and it's just one piece of the puzzle that they look at when they're looking at your student as far as admissions go. They're also looking at their application, their essay, activities, sports, recommendation letters, all of that. So the SAT is just one part of that. And I guess, on the one hand, I almost, we wonder, like these days, and I know we'll talk a little bit about it because with COVID, it's become test optional. But at the same time, it's probably the one thing right now that's sort of, equal throughout the schools across the country because, some schools are totally in person, some are virtual. So some kids might have lost out where some kids haven't. With how their instruction has been. So the one measuring stick that's probably equal that they all have to take, grades might not always reflect the same thing, but those test scores are always going to be the same test for everybody. So that's one thing they can hold up and sort of look at. So just something to keep in mind.
So the next thing we're going to go over is what each of those tests actually consist of. So we'll first talk about the SAT. Arguably, more people are familiar with the SAT than the ACT. So the SAT has 3 sections: reading and math. That's kind of the basic, level test. And then there's a writing section, and the writing section is optional. So your student will likely not want to register for the writing one. And I mean, not all colleges require it, but a lot of colleges will use that for placement. For English classes, I always tell my students that they should take the writing. They don't like to hear it, but it's a good thing to have it. Worst case scenario, they don't need the writing, but if they happen to apply for a college and they do require the writing for some reason, they can't just go back in the SAT and retake it just with the writing. They'd have to take the whole SAT again. So my mantra in life is it's better safe than sorry. So I always give my students the advice to take that writing. So the SAT score for the reading and math sections is out of 1600. So of course, the higher you are to 1600, the better your score is. And the essay is scored separately, so that's not included in that 1600 score. A lot of times students will ask us too, is my score good? And that's a really hard question to answer because in my mind, the score is only good if it gets you where you want to go. So for example, if I have two students in my office, right, with the same SAT score of 1200, one student wants to go to Salisbury, one student wants to go to Harvard. That 1200 for that student who wants to go to Salisbury, their score is probably pretty good. They're looking very good. Typically what Salisbury would want. The score of 1200 for Harvard, probably not so much. Harvard is going to be a lot more competitive and require higher scores. So in my mind, it's all about seeing if the score is good enough to get you where you want to go. And there's a couple of different ways you can find out that score. And I'm just actually going to go ahead and I'm going to pull up the College Board's website. I should have done this earlier. I apologize. to show you one way that you can easily find the score that's required. So if you log on to College Board, and your student will be very familiar with this website, especially if they've taken an AP test or they've registered for the SAT before, and they can log into their account, but they don't have to do this. And if you just click on the college search tool, and what you can do here is search by college name. So let's say I'm going to look for Towson. I'm going to pull up them. What this is going to do is pull up a profile page for a college, and pretty much every college is on here. So this information, the way this is formatted, will look the same. The information, of course, will be specific to that college. And if you look under the admissions tab of each school, and then you scroll down here, this will tell you what it looks like, what a typically accepted student looks like. So they do have information about GPA, and this was something that Ms. Sinclair and Ms. Ayers shared in our session in December. But they also have the SAT typical range, and a lot of times they'll have the ACT range as well. So this is a really good tool to be able to kind of see where their scores are and where they look in terms of being, accepted to a particular school. I always tell students, take this with a grain of salt, because we'll talk about in a little bit that the SAT and ACT aren't always required. But this is a pretty good idea to kind of, see where your student is, see if their score makes them a competitive applicant, because that, of course, is the name of the game when we're talking about standardized test scores. You can also typically find this information on CapEx, which is another search engine very similar to College Board. CapEx does require a student to have an account. It is free, but it's a really good search tool, as well as a good tool to get information about colleges. And you can also typically find that, like, a profile of a typically accepted student, that's what they'll usually call it, on a college admissions website. So like, say if you were interested in University of Maryland, you can log on to their website, and they usually have information about a typically accepted SAT score or ACT score, so you can get an idea. So some prep opportunities. This is something that we often get asked about, is how students can prep for the SAT. And a lot of times for the SAT, especially for the math kind of goes up to Algebra 2. And a lot of times students are in pre-calc or beyond as juniors. And it's not necessarily that they don't know the math, they don't know the Algebra 2 or the algebra, the geometry. It's a matter of just kind of pulling it out of the back of their minds and remembering it. So Khan Academy is, I think, a really great website. Your kids probably won't enjoy it very much, but it's a free website that students can take a practice test on, and then it gives them kind of personalized practice based on how they score on the practice test. For me, it's awesome because it's free. The student can do it when they want to do it on their own time. And with the practice test too, a lot of students struggle with the timing of the SAT. They can kind of create that high pressure time situation at home by, like, having a clock and really timing themselves. It'll kind of give them, I mean, you can't fully recreate the SAT session, how that feels, but it can kind of give them an idea of what it would be like. Their PSAT scores, if they took the PSAT this year, they can link those to Khan Academy, and it will give them some personalized practice. The PTSO, the Calvert High PTSO, is offering the Answer SAT Prep course. And I think that runs in February or March, something like that. And it's going to be virtual. And it costs about $100 and some, and students can log on and do some SAT prep. I think there's 2 different sessions. And I've heard mixed reviews about that from students. Some students really like it because it's kind of a general overview. Other students are not big fans of it because it's not as personalized. It's going to be more general. But that is another opportunity. And I can send out that information to you all as well after today's session. And then CSM typically offers a prep course. I'm not sure if they're going to or not this year because they are still very much virtual. But we will definitely, see if that's an option for you all as well.
And then the next thing we wanted to talk about, and I don't know if there's much to say about it just because it doesn't happen a lot with our students, is the SAT subject tests. So when your students go ahead to register for the SAT, they're going to sign up for the test of general knowledge, which is your basic SAT, the reading and the math and the optional writing, but you're also going to see some options to take subject tests. And a lot of times they're going to be in, like, the physics, chemistry, biology, some of the math classes, foreign language. And, you know, some colleges might require that. Usually it's going to be a more competitive college. I think Miss Ponti, I heard her mention Harvard earlier. I know I've had students apply to places like Brown and Harvard, and they've had to take that.
Mr. Verlich, your mic muted. I'm sorry.
I've been mic muted the whole time. I've been muted the
No,
whole
not
time.
the whole time. It just like clicked on. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't
yeah,
know.
right. So going back to that, but like I said, typically that's not going to be something that the kids have to do. They just do have to do the general knowledge test. And I can't tell you, to be honest, I've been at Calvert High for 15 years, and I can't tell you the last time I've seen a student have to take a subject test. When I first got here, I felt like every year there were always a couple of kids that had to take it. But I don't know, and I don't know if anyone else can chime in too, but I want to say probably 6 or 7 years at least since I've seen anyone have to take a subject test. So generally, that's not going to affect anybody, but just something to keep in mind because it might pop up for your student.
I've never had a student. I mean, this is my 9th year or 10th year at Calvert High, and I've never once had a student take the SAT subject test. So it may be something you see, but probably not. So the next thing we're going to go over is the ACT. So the ACT tends to be a little bit less familiar for people. And it used to be that the ACT was known as like the West Coast test. I know when I was in high school, that was always the big thing. Well, if you're going to a college on the West Coast, they require the ACT. It's not really the case anymore. Both are pretty much interchangeably accepted, both the SAT and the ACT. And the big difference between the SAT and the ACT is that the ACT covers science. Both tests have English or reading, and math. Writing is optional, but the ACT covers science. So this is kind of a cool thing if your student is really good at science, or maybe they're into biomed, maybe they're taking AP sciences. The ACT may really be a good spot for them to really showcase their abilities as a student. So for this reason, we kind of recommend that students take both because you never know where you're going to score better on. And the score range for the ACT, they do things a little bit differently. Their score range is 1 to 36 for a total composite score. It's not for each section. So the composite score combines all of the sections, and then you get a score between 1 and 36. Obviously 36, higher score, the better. And then again, what's a good score? You can use the College Board website. You can look on CapEx. You can look on individual college websites or consult admissions representatives from schools, and they'll give you an idea on what they're typically looking for students as an ACT score.
And then as far as the difference, and I think Ms. Ponti sort of touched on a lot of the differences just in talking about the two slides where she, talked about the SAT and ACT. But, again, going back to it, the subjects covered, the ACT has that science component, the scoring, where the ACT is on the 1 to 36 scale and the SAT is 1600. And then again, the depth of material, and I know I've always heard, they say the SAT is pretty much math-wise, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, so I think, like, as, we were saying earlier, a lot of it's just sort of going back and accessing that information the kids have learned because, if they're in pre-calc or calculus or a higher math, they haven't done Algebra 1 in a long time. So it's good to go back and practice some of that information and reactivate it in their brain because they probably see it and go, man, I used to know that, but I haven't done it. So that's why probably some of the practice opportunities would help. But, on the flip side, for the kids who've taken the higher maths, maybe on the ACT with as far as depth of material, there's going to be some higher math that would benefit the kid who's taken the higher math classes here. The same with the science classes, the kids who've taken, the higher level science, the AP physics, AP Chem, AP Bio, they're going to see some of those higher, science classes. So that might benefit them there. And what's better to take? Again, we say take them both. Check with the colleges. I know just from a practical standpoint, I know my own son was a middle of the road student in high school, and he took the his grades were like mediocre. He took the SAT, got 1 score, and then he took the ACT and got a score that translated to a much better score and opened other doors for him when he went to apply for colleges. So if he hadn't taken the SAT, he probably wouldn't have had as many college opportunities, as just taking the SAT. So it would really benefit you to take both. And I think the practice opportunities are a great thing. I've had kids in here. I know we've been meeting with juniors lately, and just starting this week. And you might want to ask your student too, if they've met with their counselor yet, because we just started this week. We're meeting with every junior going into their classroom, and then we're also having them come down and meet with them face to face. And it's not a real long, in-depth meeting. We can always have do an appointment for that later, but just to make sure they're on track as far as knowing what classes they need for next year, answering any questions they might have, making sure they're on track to take the SAT, those kind of things. But I've had kids say, how do I practice? And I know we talked about that a little bit, but I guess probably my piece of advice is you can't practice in one night. It's not something you can just like, let me go open this book. I'm going to study, the test is tomorrow. I'm going to study tonight and I'll be ready, because this is an accumulation of a lot of knowledge that goes into that test. So, if they're doing it sort of a little bit at a time, I think they're going to have a lot better results, and so much of that information, I mean, you could just type it into a search engine and it's going to pop up and you can get practice questions, practice tests. There's websites, and if they just spend a few minutes each day, I think that's going to go a long way towards helping them as far, versus like waiting till the night before and just studying. So just some stuff to keep in mind.
That's a good point, Mr. Verlich, because a lot of the students will try to cram and they see the SAT as just kind of something extra. But if they can spend a half hour, it's not a crazy amount of time that they would need to spend, but even just a half hour a week taking a practice test or 2, or even 2 times a month taking a practice test, that's going to really help them.
Yeah, and I don't know, every kid, I swear, every kid I've talked to has said, yeah, I took it once, but I didn't study. Mm-hmm. That's all what I always hear. I've taken it once, but I haven't studied. Well, why not study? Why not at least study a little bit, why get a lower score if with a little bit of effort you can get a better score? And generally kids go up. I don't think I've seen too many kids go down from the first to the second try. Maybe from the second to the third, or the third to the fourth if they go that far into it, but usually always up from the first to the second. So if they study a little bit for the first and they get their score up 100 points, and then they take it again and they go up again, they're going to be in a better place versus doing no studying for that first test.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So another point we want to touch on is the SAT, the ACT, and CSM. So if your student plans to start at CSM or go to CSM, they really aren't required to take the SAT or the ACT. A lot of students and families kind of get worried because they think if their student is going to start there and then transfer on to like University of Maryland or some 4-year college, that they're going to require it. But they aren't, even as part of that transfer process. The whole purpose of the SAT is to and the ACT is to kind of determine how well a student and predict how well they're going to do in college. And if they start out at CSM, they're going to have college coursework that 4-year college is going to be able to look at when they're deciding whether or not they'll accept them as a transfer student. So it's not typically required if they want to go to CSM. But here's kind of another idea on how to think, is my score good? So CSM, they don't require them for application, the SAT or ACT scores, but they do use them for college level placement. And CSM goes through a lot of different things to place students. They'll look at transcripts, they'll look at dual enrollment if a student did that, AP exams, that kind of thing. But they can also use SAT and ACT scores. So if you have a math score, and this is just roughly, like if you're going into a special program like business or engineering, they may require different things, but just roughly as a general college student, if your student has an SAT math score of 530 and an SAT English score of 480, they consider that college ready, and the student would kind of place into college level, introductory level for English and math. For the ACT, they're looking for a math score of 21 and an English score of 21. So just another idea, is my score good or not? That's kind of a rough idea on how you can kind of reference things as well.
And then, you know, I know this came up in one of the opportunities, you know, we're talking about test or preparation opportunities. This is an opportunity that's great, and it's here at Calvert High, the answer class, and it's a Saturday, and they're going to give you prep for the ACT and SAT. You have to pay for it. I was looking at their website, and I think it's around $150. So, but it's a good one-day opportunity to go ahead and get prepped for the class. Sort of, and it's that intensive opportunity, and generally it's offered about a week before the SAT. I think a lot of times. So they're going to hear it, and then it's going to get them ready. But again, I would really recommend that the kids do some preparation prior to going into that answer class. And if you look, and I know we will have the opportunity here at Calvert High, but if you go onto that, you know, use that link there for the answer class and go there, those classes are offered at high schools all throughout Maryland. So if you can't make the session at Calvert High, you might be able to go and take it at another high school too. You know, so something to keep in mind. And that's true, just, you know, I guess, and I don't even know if we touch on this, Miss Ponti, but that's true of the SAT too. You know, when the kids sign up for the SAT, it's going to ask them to choose a test location. And there are some tests that are here, but there's also tests all over the place. You know, I know sometimes at Huntingtown, Patuxent, I think of other ones that are like high schools that are not too far that it's offered quite a bit. Like I think Leonardtown offers it on a pretty regular basis. I think Southern and Anne Arundel County offers it on a pretty regular basis too. So if you know, if the date or the time, whatever, or it's filled up, the one in Calvert County, you can always go to one of these other schools and take the test. So that's something to keep in mind as you're doing the registration piece.
And I'm fairly certain too that the answer class is going to be offered virtually. I don't think they're offering anything in person, I guess just because of COVID. So that kind of makes it a little bit more convenient too.
Right.
So just something to think about. So the next thing we want to touch on is accommodations. So a lot of students will have IEPs or 504s, and if they receive classroom accommodations through their IEP or 504 plan, they may potentially be able to use those accommodations when they take the SAT or the ACT, or even AP exams, PSAT, that kind of thing. And typically the accommodations that they will really honor are going to be extended time if a student needs breaks, or if a student has special needs like a scribe, someone to write the test for them, things like that. So if your student has a 504 or an IEP, we recommend that you chat with Ms. Stover for the 504s, Ms. Hook for the IEPs, just to get some more information about how they can use those accommodations for the SAT or the ACT. There is a little bit of an approval process. It's not terrible, but there is some paperwork, unfortunately. And it does take a little bit of time to get these things put in place. So it's probably a good idea to talk with them sooner rather than later to get these accommodations put into place.
And you know, just throw it, Ms. Ponti, I wanted to say too that, you know, if you've had your 504 meeting or IEP, that might have already come up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think Ms. Stover, that's sort of part of her standard spiel.
Yeah, that's true.
Goes through it, she gives you the form to sign off, so that the kids can get that. I guess this is just a word of caution too. You know, I think a lot of kids need it, but I know I've had kids that have had time and a half or double time. And if you have time and a half or double time, you have to stay in that session for the whole time. So if that SAT takes 4 or 5 hours and you have double time, you know, you're going to be there for 8 hours, whether you're done or not.
And I believe Ms. Reed had a question about the accommodations, whether or not a college will know. We have to fill out an accommodation form with the College Board. I'm not sure if the college will know though. Do any of the other counselors know that the college will know?
Can I ask, do you mean whether or not the college will know if you took accommodations on the SAT, or if the college will know about your accommodations? I just was clarifying because they won't both. Okay, well, on the test, I don't think they necessarily know whether or not you were accommodated. And as far as I'm aware, particularly with a 504, I know that if there is opportunities for the student to get some of those accommodations they had in high school, it is usually upon the student to go to, there's usually like a student place that you can go in the admissions building that you can go and you bring your 504, the student would bring it to them, and they don't always honor every single one that you have, but I know one of my roommates in college, she was able to have extended time on her tests and projects in college because she turned in her 504 from high school. So that is more upon the student to turn that in and to see what the college will offer. Most of them, they might not, but they will usually do extended time, things like that, or like a separate room for testing, things like that I've seen schools honor. But that is upon the student to turn that in and be an advocate for themselves. It doesn't happen automatically.
And I know as far as test results, when we've seen them, I've never seen anything on there that refers to a student having accommodations. So I would tend to think that's not told to the college. But again, I think like Ms. Sinclair said, you can get those in college. And I think some colleges are real good about honoring those accommodations and some maybe not so good. So if your student has accommodations and you want those to follow through, that's probably something as you're doing the college research process and looking at, you and your student looking at colleges where they want to go, to maybe ask that question of the colleges, like, how do you look at 504s and IEPs and accommodations, and do you do that? So. And then the SAT and ACT, how to register, it is all done online. I know Ms. Ponti, and I don't know, do you still have your College Board website up, Ms. Ponti?
I can pull it up.
Would you?
Mm-hmm. Tell me what you want me to click on.
Just the main College Board, just so we can see that. And if you could go up to the top. And I just wanted to just look at this top part here, because, to take the SAT, I'm not seeing that. Okay. Now, I guess just that front, scroll up. There you go, right there.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. Sorry.
But where it says sign in, and it, there you go. Like username, password. So a lot of students already have a College Board account, and this is where they're going to go into to register for the SAT. I know specifically if students are taking taking an AP class right now, I think they use College Board to access a lot of stuff for the classes. But if your student doesn't, they're going to need to go ahead and sign up. So they click the sign up button down below those two blocks, and it's going to take them through a process to sign up and create an account. And once you have an account, then you can go back in and register for the SAT. The biggest thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, and I think everybody would shake their head yes, is make sure your student is absolutely crystal clear, and maybe that you need to be crystal clear. What is their login and password? Because the biggest issue we have to kids getting signed up for the SAT is they've forgotten their login and password, or they've created an account in 8th or 9th grade, that they don't remember, and now they're a junior and they want to create another account. And the SAT, and I'm sure the ACT is the same way, they're very finicky about letting a kid create 2 accounts. And I'm sure you've heard all the, stuff about testing, cheating scandals, all that. So they've been real picky about that for a long time. And they'll only let the student have 1 account. And if there's 2, they're going to get blocked out of signing up for the test. And a lot of times kids come down here and they've waited, and it's about a day or 2 before the test, and they cannot get signed up, and they don't know why. They're like, I know I have an account, and I don't know why I can't get signed up. So what we end up doing, and we could do this, but it's a long, involved process, but we call them on the phone, the SAT people, and we'll have a conversation, and they'll have to have the students speak in and answer some what do they call those, security questions. And and we'll get it all straightened out. But it just takes a lot of extra effort. And especially if that happens to your student, if the deadline's coming up quick and they waited to the last minute, that could prevent them from getting signed up on time. So I really emphasize with both the ACT and SAT as they create that account, make sure they're real clear on the login and password. You might want to make sure you know it too. So.
And if they forget it too, they can always use this forgot username and password. I would start there because the wait times to call are always very long. And I imagine with COVID and everyone being short-staffed, I'm sure they're even longer than normal. So they can always use the forgot username and password and see if they can get it that way too.
And I know the only problem with that is then we end up like, well, what was the email you used when you created it? Well, I think it was this. And then we're punching it, it's like we're hunting, we're fishing around and hoping we find it. So just, when you do it the first time, just make sure everyone's clear on what it is. And then going back to this, be cognizant of the deadlines. Their deadlines to get signed up, and again, we say this the same, we talk to the kids about the deadlines here, with the ACT, the SAT, and also with college applications. I think the kids are so used to having deadlines sort of bent for them, they're not going to get bent for this kind of stuff. The deadline is the deadline. Midnight on that date, it closes out. SAT and ACT, they have late deadlines, but then you're going to pay an extra fee on top of like if the SAT is $50 to take, you're going to pay another $35, I think, for late registration. So I'm sure you don't want to have to do that if you can avoid it. We say plan on taking it more than once. I know the SAT is going to come up, and I think we talk about it here a little bit later, but the juniors are going to have an opportunity to take it here at school in March. But you definitely want to take it more than once, because we see kids steadily progress up with their scores as they take it. And I've even noticed on the score reports the kids get, it'll even give them a breakdown, and it'll say you have, if you take the SAT again, you have a blank percentage chance of going up this many points based on analysis of past kids. So that's something to keep in mind. And when they do sign up, they can have their scores sent to 4 schools for free. And I think it's about, about $13 or $14, Miss Ponti, to get the scores sent.
I think it's like 16 or 17, so that can save you a lot of money.
Right. So when the kids sign up to take the SAT, they could designate 4 colleges that they want to get their scores, but they have to do it when they're signing up. And I don't know, that might not be, you could have them sent now when they take it as early as a junior, but you really might not know where you're going to apply. But definitely as they get later, as they're taking it maybe in their, in the second time or in their senior year, they're probably going to have a better idea of where they're going. So they could designate those schools. And that's, if you send them to 4 of your schools, you've saved yourself probably close to $80 right there by designating those 4 schools. Lastly, we do have, if you're experiencing some kind of economic hardship, there are fee waivers that kids can use to waive the fee for SAT, and they can use it twice. So if a student would come in and say, hey, can I get a fee waiver? And generally the question I ask is, are you on free or reduced lunch? That's our sort of rule of thumb. But I know, like I said, with COVID and things going on, there have been other extenuating circumstances. So, we'll listen to what the kids have to say, and we can give them that fee waiver. And by taking it twice with the waiver, they've saved you $100. And sometimes those waivers, too, when they go to apply for a college next year, and college applications are even a little more expensive, usually somewhere between $60 and $75 or $80. A lot of colleges will say, you could get a fee waiver with us on the college application fee, and the question they're asking is, did you use the SAT fee waiver? So that sort of bumps them into that category. So then that saves you more money. So just something to think about.
I want to go back, Mr. Verlich, to talk about the free sending scores. Because a lot of students will say, well, I don't want to send it to anybody. Like, I don't want to send my scores because I don't know how I'm going to do. And here's the thing. If a student takes the SAT 3 or 4 times, 2 or 3 times, whatever, if they send the report, if they have their scores sent, let's say they don't send them when they register, and then next fall they send it to their schools. It's going to have every score listed anyway. So I advise that students just send it. And a lot of colleges will do what's called the super score. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that term. And what that is if a student takes the SAT multiple times, and one time they score best on math, but it's not in the same, like reading and math are not, their best scores are not in the same test setting, they'll usually pull out the best scores and kind of give the student the benefit of the doubt. But I definitely recommend they take advantage of sending those scores. I know we have a lot of questions in the chat about the school day SAT, so let's switch over to that, Mr. Verlich. Talk about that a little.
And this is something I think we've just started in the past year or two, and it is a great opportunity. All the juniors will take it. It's going to be on Wednesday, March 23rd, and it's free, so you don't even need to worry about a waiver for that. The county's going to cover that, and you don't need to go on the College Board and register either. Okay, that's all going to be taken care of. So all your student needs to do is to be here that day, and they'll be able to take the test. So there you go. That's going to be one opportunity to take it right there. So if everybody takes it on March 23rd, they're going to have their score. That gives you a starting point of where you're at. And this is just where, as a counselor, my thought process, and I know we've tried to drill this into the kids, is you take it in March. And now there's going to be a couple of more SAT opportunities coming up this year. There's one in May, there's one in June. So they take their score in March, then they could turn around and see, and before they even have to register, because generally when you register, it's about a month ahead is the deadline. So if the test was May 5th, you probably have like till April 3rd to register. I'm just throwing out a ballpark there. And in fact, you should have gotten in the email the link for today's meeting. I think Ms. Ponti sent you an attachment that has all the dates for SAT and ACT along with the deadlines. And you'll see that like month window. But, by the time you get your March scores back, then you could say, okay, when do I want to take it again? And you could take it in May or June. Now, by the end of your junior year, you've got 2 scores in hand. And you're going into your senior year. And for some kids, they might not need to take it again. They might be where they want to be, totally happy. But they'll have another opportunity. I think there's going to be, is there one, I believe, in October? I think is the
There's
next.
One in August and then one in October, typically,
not
September.
And I think if you take the October one, you'll have your scores back for that November 1st deadline. It's early October, right?
It's always cutting it close. Yeah, it's early October, but it's always cutting it close.
It takes about 3 weeks to get your scores back. That's something to keep in mind too. Like as you're looking at, because you're looking at, again, deadlines. And November 1st is a big college deadline. So you want to make sure you have everything in by that deadline, including those test scores. So just something to keep in mind. Are we answering all the questions here? Is there anything we're not answering?
Yes, I think so far, yes, you have.
Okay.
And it's good practice too, I think, to kind of elaborate on what you said, Mr. Verlich, for students to be happy. Like in an ideal world, we want students to be done taking the SAT and ACT by the end of this school year. The fall is going to be very stressful with college applications. And if they can have their scores all set and ready to go at a place where you as a family and they're comfortable with, that will make the fall that much easier for them, because that way they can focus their time and energy on the applications, which, trust me, will keep them busy enough. So that's
right.
A really good thing.
And I think too, the thing we emphasize is, make sure your students they give themselves as many options as possible. So if they've taken the test a couple of times, now they've got some options of places they can apply versus they wait for the first time to take it till October, and maybe they take it in October for the first time and they don't get a score they like. Now they have to turn around and they're scrambling. And we have those conversations with students say, yeah, I'm going to go to college, but I haven't taken it. I'm going to, and that's, You know, that's why we're trying to push it now to, you know, and I think the March thing is a good thing because that gets everybody in the door with at least one score.
And keep in mind too, I don't know why the College Board does this, but the May SAT day, that's a lot of the one the juniors plan to take. That is right smack in the middle of AP exam weeks. So some students are okay with that. They're kind of already in test mode, so they're okay with that. But other students are like, oh no, like that's too overwhelming. So keep that in mind if your student plans to sign up for the May test date as well. Are you ready for me to change the slide, Mr. Verlich?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So because of this, if anything good came out of the pandemic, I think this is one of the good things. But because of COVID and students not being able to have access to take the SAT and the ACT, a lot of colleges have chosen to make the SAT or ACT optional for applicants. So that's good news. And we always advise that you double check with any college that your student's interested in because things can change and every college, of course, wants something a little bit different. But as a general rule of thumb, we kind of contacted some different colleges, like ones that our students will typically apply to, and got some information. So I talked to Salisbury, and they usually don't make their decisions about testing until the summer, which is a little bit frustrating. But they do advise students, and as of right now, they are SAT, ACT optional for students who have a 3.5 GPA or above. But they do advise students that they take the SAT or ACT because they require SAT or ACT scores to be able to apply for scholarships from Salisbury. So for Salisbury, you don't need it for admission, but you need it to be considered for scholarships. And I think scholarships are a big thing. So if your student's interested in Salisbury, I definitely have them take it. University of Maryland, they confirm that they will definitely be test optional for students applying next fall. So that's good news. Towson's also test optional, so that's also good news for them. And they don't look at SAT or ACT scores for scholarships, either of those schools, so that's a good thing. St. Mary's College as well, they're going to be test optional. And Frostburg, they haven't made any decisions yet, but they anticipate that they'll remain test optional. They're test optional this year for students, and they feel that that will continue in the future. So you can see these are like 5 Maryland schools. 4 out of 5 of these schools, well, actually all 5 are test optional for admissions. And then Salisbury is kind of the only odd man out that requires the SAT or ACT for scholarships. So I think in your research, you're going to find that a lot of schools don't require the SAT or ACT, but the only caveat would be that scholarship. That's kind of something we see pretty often.
And that would probably be the one reason I would really emphasize it too, is to get that scholarship money. I mean, I had a student a couple of years ago, and he really wanted to go out of state to a school, and his GPA was just it was enough to get him in, but he had to pay full price. And so he kept working and working. He couldn't quite get up the GPA to where he wanted it to be because he had a rough, freshman, a little bit of sophomore year. But somehow, I don't know how he did it, but he took the SAT again, took it like one extra time, ended up getting a 1400 on it, which is a pretty good score. And all of a sudden, the school came through with a whole bunch of money based on that score. So that, it can really help you.
I'd also add in real quick that I had a student just this year have to upload their scores for direct admission to the honors college. So some schools have honors college or things like that, and they want your scores, and if they meet a certain threshold along with your GPA, you can also use those to get into those honors colleges in general. So that's something to look at as well, not just for the scholarships, but if they want to be in some of those other groups at the school, such as an honors college.
Do we have any other questions right now about the SAT? You guys can unmute, you can put it in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with.
I would just add that sometimes, like at the University of Maryland, you want to go there and major in business. So you go to Maryland, you get in Maryland, or you want to major in engineering. Then you have to get in that school within the University of Maryland. And sometimes, like they want engineering students or someone to have a higher SAT or in one category. So that's just something else you might want to research while you're looking at that.
Okay, we're going to kind of switch gears for a little bit and let you guys know about a resource that we have available.
And I can't tell you how valuable this resource is. And, you know, the sad thing is a lot of kids don't take advantage of it. It's the Chesapeake College Plan. And Michelle Kidwell is our CHS representative. And the Chesapeake College Plan is a nonprofit that comes around to the Calvert County high schools and provides help to the kids as far as doing college searches, helping fill out applications, look for scholarships, and even fill out the FAFSA. And she's, like I said, great resource. I know I have two kids. One is 31, another 27. So they've been out of college for a long time. But when my kids first went to college and I had $0 saved, and you'd probably think the guidance counselor would have a lot of money saved for his kids for college. But when my kids were going, I'm like, they're going, but and you know how it is these days. You don't really, you're just making ends meet. You really can't save that, like, that college fund of how much it costs these days. How do I pay for it? So, 15 years ago, I called the person who had Miss Kidwell's job, and she gave me some ways as far as how I could pay for college. And I think any count, and I know Miss Harris has had kids go to college. We've all leaned on Miss Kidwell or whoever had that job here to help figure out how to pay for college. And to me, that's like the biggest worry these days. We can find colleges, you can get into colleges, but the big worry, and that's a lot of times what affects where the kids go, is what's going to be the bottom line price tag. But she comes here on Tuesdays and meets with kids. And I know right now we're in the transition. We don't have the 1 hour lunch, through the end of the semester here. But when we do have the 1 hour lunch, she's here on Tuesdays. She's in room 406. And each week she has sort of a topic that she's talking about with the kids. I know early in the year, it's like the college search. Right now, I know with seniors, it's probably like scholarships and FAFSA and the financial aid piece. Her email's there, and I know you'll have a link to this presentation. So I'd encourage you to reach out, because not only will she meet with the kids, but she'll meet with the kids and the parents and help you through some of this. I know the FAFSA, especially for if you haven't had a student go to college, can be quite daunting. Some of the scholarship process, so she can walk you through that. Like I said, there's probably some schools where parents go and pay thousands of dollars to have someone come in like Miss Kidwell and meet with them and their student and do what she's going to do for your kid for free. So I really, like I said, I can't emphasize what a great resource this is, and for you and your students to take advantage of it, because she really can help.
She's amazing. And even now that we don't have the 1 hour lunch, she's still here. She's still coming to school every week, and she's available to meet with students individually. So if you're interested in that, you can just email her, or your student can come talk to us and we can help connect you with her, because she really is amazing. I don't know how we got so lucky to have her, but she's very great. And the other thing is that in our next session, our next junior breakfast in February, she will actually be coming as a guest presenter to talk about the college application process. So if you come in February, you'll have a chance to meet her and hear from her about some tips and tricks and things that she has up her sleeve to help you and your student. So our next junior breakfast is going to be Thursday, February 10th at 7:20. And just to keep things easy with COVID and to also make things easy and accessible for Michelle Kidwell, we're going to offer our next session on Teams as well. So there won't be an option to come in person. Everything will be on Teams. But if you do want to attend, we just ask that you RSVP. And I am going to put the link, oh, maybe not. I'll put the link in our chat right now, and we'll also be sending it out via school messenger, social media, all those different channels again, and remind you as we get closer. Also, too, like Mr. Verlich mentioned, We've been meeting with juniors individually. We've been meeting them in classes, and we're kind of right in the middle of that right now. So our hope is by the end of January, we'll have met with every single junior individually for a little bit of a check-in. And one of the things we share with students, because we don't have the luxury of being in a classroom and necessarily seeing our students every day. So we struggle a little bit on how to get news out to students. So we kind of share information a couple different ways with students. So you can kind of talk with them about this and make sure they're keeping their ears and eyes open. One thing that we always use is the morning announcements. We know that's tough though. Some students, don't pay attention to the morning announcements, or some students, if they're taking a CTA course, they might be at the CTA in the morning, so they don't necessarily hear our announcements. But that's one thing we always use. We always share the same information on our social media. So if you follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, we share that information. I always share pretty much everything through that newsletter, our monthly newsletter. So if you see that, take a look at that. And it tends to be a lot of information just because we have a lot to share, but if you take a look at it, there'll be some good stuff there. We also send emails pretty regularly to students. So if you tell them to check their school email, more than likely they're going to have a couple messages from me in their inbox. Whether or not they read them, I don't know, but the information is definitely shared. And then we also do remind text messages. And if you want to sign up for that as a parent, a lot of students have signed up, but if you want to sign up for a parent, that information's there. If you wanted to sign up, you would just text at Calvert23 to 81010, and that would get you signed up on my text list. So anytime I have an announcement, I'll send out a text message on there as well. Because we're all just about sharing information and making sure everybody, knows what's going on. And we know it's tough because we don't get to see the students every day, so we really have to get creative. So I think that about wraps up things for us for today, but I wanted to open up the floor just in case anyone has any questions or anything else that they needed this morning. So again, feel free to unmute your mic or, ask questions or anything in the chat. All right, well, if anyone doesn't have any questions, I guess we are all good to go. And because I recorded today's session, I'll send out the link again if you wanted to rewatch or look back on things. And I'll send that out shortly today after it has a chance to be uploaded on YouTube. And what I will do is I'm going to upload the video on YouTube, and then I will email you all the link later on today, hopefully by lunchtime, but we'll see if the internet cooperates with me. But we thank everybody for coming, spending your morning with us. We had one other question. Will the 4 free college notifications of scores be available for students for the March test? Yes, they will. The students will, when they, the morning of the test, when they are signing up, they will be able to enter their 4 scores. And I think you can do it up to 3 or 4 days after you actually take the test by logging into the College Board account. So that will be available to them for that March in school day SAT as well. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for coming and spend the morning with us. We hope to see you all in February. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks.